Welcome to our webinar. My name is Stephen Aquario. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Association of Counties. We have several hundred county officials, local government officials that have registered for today's program. New York State has legalized cannabis. Now what? A very important current event. And I want to thank, before we get underway here, our sponsor, PKF O'Connor Davies. PKF O'Connor Davies provides cannabis program administrative services to local governments to assist in the oversight of activities in your jurisdiction. They review the application of those entities who wish to participate in the cannabis marketplace, so community input is effective. PKF has been a long supporter of the Association of Counties educational programs, and we greatly appreciate their support of today's program. Before I get to the speakers, I have a couple of observations I want to make personally, but before I do that, I'd like to go to Jeanette Stanziano, the Director of Education and Training for NYSAC, to go over a few housekeeping announcements. Jeanette.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for joining us today for this program. Just a couple of housekeeping points. We will be recording this program and posting also a PDF of all of the slides that are presented today, also on the NYSAC website after about an hour after we've concluded. You can also find listed on the website with that recording and the PDF a copy of the OSC, oh, excuse me, this isn't a certified program, I apologize. These will all be posted on the website. We'd also like to encourage you to submit questions. We ask you to do so in writing at any time during the program under the questions tab of your dashboard. Please submit your question in writing and we will get to it during the Q&A, which will be approximately in the last 10 to 15 minutes of our presentations today. Thank you so much, and back to Steve.
Okay, so our speakers today are Axel Burnaby, Assistant Counsel to the Governor, Andrew M. Cuomo. Axel oversees legal and policy deliberations in the health portfolio. As part of Axel's responsibilities is all the initiatives related to medical, hemp, and adult use cannabis. Over the past 5 years, he has supervised the expansion of the cannabis medical program and the implementation of the state's hemp program. Axel is responsible for driving the administration's proposal for a comprehensive regulation of all segments of the cannabis economy, including the creation of a new Office of Cannabis Management that would permit the implementation of adult use. Prior to joining the Cuomo administration, Axel was a partner at an international law firm where he was a nationally recognized antitrust expert with a particular focus on the healthcare industry. Thank you, Axel, for agreeing to be with us here today. Renee Borden will also join us from the New York statewide DRE Coordinator Committee, Drug Recognition Expert Coordinator Committee. Renee works out of the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, the New York State Governor's Traffic Safety Committee as coordinator. Renee oversees the Advanced Roadside Impairment Driving Enforcement, DRE programs for New York State. These programs are used to train law enforcement officers, also dogs, to observe, and other animals perhaps, to observe, identify, and articulate the signs of impairment related to alcohol, drugs, or a combination of both, and now cannabis to a greater degree. Lastly, we have Sydney Snow, Senior Manager, Government Community Affairs for Ease Technology. At Ease, Ms. Snow supports the company's government affairs efforts to change banking and taxation laws at the federal level surrounding cannabis-related businesses. Ms. Snow also leads the government and community affairs efforts across the Eastern, Midwest, Southern, and Mountain states of the United States, developing meaningful partnerships with elected officials, third-party stakeholders, and advocates. Going to focus today on diversity and delivery. And so we're very pleased to have these speakers that are with us here today. So first off, before I turn over to Axel, I just wanted to make a couple of observations, and you could stay right on this slide here, Jeanette, until we go to Axel. What I wanted to mention is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which is called MRTA. You'll hear that perhaps during the presentation today. This now legalizes the possession, consumption, and licensed cultivation and sale of marijuana by individuals over the age of 21. The new statute does this by making several amendments to the public health law and the penal law, and enacts a whole new body of law called the cannabis law. A couple of other observations here. The cultivation and sale of cannabis will be overseen, as Axel will be discussing here, by a new state agency, the Office of Cannabis Management, which will also be controlled or overseen by a cannabis control board comprised of officials selected by the governor and the state legislature. The board then will be vested with the authority to issue and revoke licenses, and I'm sure Axel will go over that. So individuals would be applying to the board for licenses to cultivate, process, distribute, deliver, or dispense cannabis within the state for sale. There'll be separate licenses are required for each separate facility at which a stage of production or distribution takes place. And the legislation also authorizes the establishment and licensure of on-site consumption locations. Axel, I'm sure, will be going over things like that. An applicant for an on-site consumption license would be required to notify the municipality where the on-site consumption venue would be located, which would then trigger the responsibility or the obligation for that local government to oppose that or otherwise give commentary. And Axel, perhaps in your presentation, you could state whether or not the county government where the applicant has asked for, submitted an application, if they would be required to be contacted as well. I believe the answer to that is yes, but hopefully it's just not going to be the village or the town or the city, but in fact the county should be approached as well and notified. Cannabis sales, there's a revenue component of this. I'm sure Axel will talk about this as well, a little bit more detail, but we're subject to an excise tax right now with 13% excise tax. And some of that funds can be used for motor vehicles, the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee to implement the law and expand DRE training. And we're hoping to have more of that and more of that discussion, perhaps when Renee talks. But consuming cannabis will, by and large, be treated the same by the health law as consuming tobacco products, with the exceptions of a few key areas, such as inside a retail tobacco business or a cigar bar, one cannot use cannabis in a retail tobacco business or cigar bar, or an outdoor dining area that permits tobacco use, or at public conventions for purposes of sampling tobacco products. Or a major exception here is individuals can, of course, use tobacco in an automobile, but with cannabis, you are not allowed to use cannabis in an automobile, unlike tobacco. A couple questions that we get is local law enforcement enforcement of these violations, if you will. There's nothing sort of in the statutes that talk about the enforcement of violations, but this is now a civil violation and not a criminal violation. So the civil penalty is $25 for the violation, or community services not to exceed 20 hours. But there is some degree of enforcement uncertainty, so we have to get a little clarification on that. Right now, the default will be law enforcement, but at this point in time, it's not in the statute of who's responsible. Home cultivation and the rules surrounding home cultivation, and the county does have a role here, and a regulation or a local law or a resolution that is going to reasonably regulate home cultivation, and Axel hopefully can cover that. The final piece that I had, and I wanted to give an observation about, is public employers, the county governments, and certain positions within county government. Can they still, for instance, can a sheriff implement and maintain a workplace safety policy that prohibits perhaps a deputy sheriff, road patrol, or a correction officer from consuming marijuana? We believe the answer to that is yes, but we encourage the county officials that are on the line right now for this webinar to review your labor law policies, your employee manuals, and make sure that these types of substance abuse or substance use, in this particular case, in an employer-employee contract is in those policies. But perhaps if you are carrying a firearm, there are federal laws which do not allow the use of cannabis when carrying a firearm. So that's all I wanted to say briefly to set the table here. We encourage you to submit questions as we go through today's presentation. And at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Axel. And I want to say thank you to Axel for all his great legal work and his availability to talk to county governments, to the Association of Counties. Over the last 3 to 5 years, we've talked to Axel daily, weekly, monthly, all through the year. Congratulations on achieving a goal that the governor set out to get done, Axel, in large part to your work. So I'll turn it over to you, Axel, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here, and we could switch to the next slide to start with some substance. But before we do jump in, just wanted to echo what Steve just said. I mean, it's been several years. We first introduced this bill at the governor's office. It was in the legislature before that, but we first introduced it in the budget of 2018, and since that time, Steve's been a real partner, and NISAC more generally in trying to work out the kinks here. This is a fairly substantial and far-reaching piece of legislation. It touches a lot of aspects of all our residents and constituents' lives. So we're really happy that we were able to get feedback from folks and work in partnership with a lot of the agencies and stakeholders, frankly, that are going to be impacted by this. That said, we certainly understand that there are a lot of pieces here that may need to be cleaned up, that may need to be tweaked, certainly that need to be interpreted and reinterpreted and specified and clarified in regulation. So because of the sheer scope of this legislation, I, as counsel to the governor, I'm only superficially familiar with a lot of it, because it ranges from very detailed criminal law to tax policy to local home rule issues to healthcare to the financial law and reinvestment. So no, we're not quite skipping the slides yet. Sorry, I wasn't even. This was all by way of a disclaimer. Apologies. The other thing I wanted to say is that we are committed to work with stakeholders like NISAC in the rollout. The idea is really to get feedback, to have listening sessions. That's the first thing we want to do, to get feedback from communities that have been impacted by the sort of the criminal enforcement of drug policy, because that, if folks know anything about this bill, you'll see that the overarching intent of the bill is really to provide resources back into those communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. So there's a big commitment at the state level to focus on communities, and so we really want to hear from those communities in setting those priorities and understanding how those funds get set. And I'll go through some of those as I go through it. So again, thank you to Steve and the team at NISAC for doing this. The overarching, before I jump into the details of the actual bill, the overarching intent of the bill was to move away from a framework where we were criminalizing drug use and the sale of drugs, especially when it comes to cannabis, move away from that, which would seem to have not provided the desired result, which is curbing the use of cannabis in the general population, and moving towards a public health approach and a public health framework. My portfolio is public health. I've been looking at this for a number of years, and the evidence we've seen in other states and the evidence we're getting from the harm reduction community and the public health experts is that criminalization does not deter use, and that public health and targeting folks that have substance use disorders and that have a hard time regulating consumption is the way you want to do this. Now, of course, a shift like this is going to have important implications culturally and normatively. People are already, for example, driving under the influence of cannabis, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a problem or a risk, or that there may be more people that feel emboldened driving under the risk because it's now legal to consume. So we have our challenges, and there's going to be a transition period and some years as we gain our footing. But we believe that fundamentally the shift towards public health is the right one for everybody involved. So how did we achieve this? Well, the first thing we had to do was create a new law, because nobody was dealing with cannabis in a comprehensive way. And when we talk about cannabis here, we're talking about comprehensively regulating the medical program, with which everyone's familiar with, or which has been around for 5 or 6 years. The cannabinoid hemp program, which is really any derivative or extract from the cannabis plant that does not involve THC, which is the psychoactive component that gets you high. That's all regulated under cannabinoid hemp, and you probably have folks that are growing hemp and processing hemp in your jurisdictions. We've had a vibrant hemp program since 2015. And then finally, adult use, which is what was legalized most recently in March 31st when we passed the MRTA or MRTA. So it's really regulating all three of those under the same rubric. So what does the, I'm going to try to move quickly through this because I'm mindful of the time, and Steve did an excellent job. Really, Steve, commend you on your knowledge of the bill, because you touched on all the important pieces and you actually answered a lot of the questions completely correctly. So I'm going to try to go through these slides fairly quickly so we give you an overview, and then if you have questions we can follow up. But each one of these topics could have a presentation of their own. So high level, new law. It's not going to be just the executive that runs this. It's a cannabis control board. Think liquor state liquor authority, except it's a 5-member board, 3 from the Gov, 2 from the House. The houses, sorry, 1 each, Senate and Assembly. They're really going to set the vision here. They're gonna make the market decisions. How many licenses? What are the application periods? Sort of, how many dispensaries do we want? How many growers do we want? Part of the exercise from a public health standpoint is controlling the number of licenses, so you don't have a cannabis vendor on every corner, and it's a controlled rollout. There's a social and economic equity plan that has to be developed by the board, and that speaks to what I was saying before about really reinvesting in the communities that have been disproportionately impacted. So they issue the regs and the rules and regulations that are recommended by the Office of Cannabis Management. So that's the top board, the 5-member top board. The head of the agency, which is called the Office of Cannabis Management, is headed up by an executive director, which is appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. Next slide, please. And then you have the office. So the office really does what you would expect it to do. It manages the day-to-day. There are 2 particular positions in there that really sort of reflect the intent of making the office, of driving the office with intentionality and purpose, and that's the Chief Equity Officer and the Deputy Director of Public Health. Both those are named in the statute. They have to be filled, and the Chief Equity Officer, in fact, has to be voted on by the board. So these are 2 positions that are dedicated to the 2 primary imperatives of this bill, which is public health and equity. There's also a board, and this will be important on the back end, because once revenue starts to come in, the tax revenue is earmarked to be reinvested in the communities and in the counties and localities that have been disproportionately impacted by the sort of criminalization of drugs. So those communities are going to be receiving 40% of the total revenue coming in. So that's a big chunk of the money coming in, and that is going to be administered by Cannabis Advisory Board, which is a 13-member board, 7 from the executive and then 6 from the houses. They're going to provide recommendations and also approve the grants that are going to go to the community. And just by way of situating, the OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, is technically an independent office in the State Liquor Authority, but it functions quite independently and is controlled by the board. And it'll have offices in New York, Buffalo, and Albany, like the Liquor Authority does, but in separate offices. Next slide, please. So the bill's divided. Article 3 is medical, Article 4 is adult use, Article 5 is hemp. Big sort of sections. If you go, it's new consolidated law. So if you go into New York State laws, you actually see it as its own law right after canal law. So it's a standalone. It's easy to find. It should be hopefully somewhat easy to read. But Article 4 is where you get the adult use. One of the things that we tried to do here is make this a small business driven approach, meaning we really tried to limit the number of large national or multi-state big companies that would take a disproportionately large market share. So we made it a 2-tier market structure. Think alcohol, think Main Street liquor stores rather than large sort of Costco distributors. You limit the number of dispensaries, you limit the number of growers, but you have all sorts of other types of licenses. Each one has its own rights and obligations. You have nurseries that grow stuff, you have growers, you have processors, co-ops, micro businesses, delivery, which we'll hear from these. And you have all sorts of requirements in the licenses. You have to contribute to the communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. There's a big environmental push to make sure that anybody who's growing is doing so in a sustainable and regenerative way. Labor piece is very important. We want these to be good union jobs. And of course, a lot of quality control, public health, testing, packaging, labeling. We're going to limit advertising and marketing. We're not, no billboards, no sort of highly visible marketing. The exercise is not to promote consumption, it's to control and allow for responsible consumption. So next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So again, I mentioned the social and economic equity is a very, very important piece of this. And so what this all says is we're going to be focusing at the office, and the control board is going to sort of dictate exactly what shape that takes. But the bill itself, the intent of the bill is to really have a goal of awarding 50% of all licenses to social and economic equity applicants. Social and economic equity applicants include minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, service-disabled veterans, or distressed farmers, which are defined in the statute. The idea is really to try to have folks build these small businesses. We're going to provide incubator and wraparound technical assistance services to some of these folks so that they're able to run businesses. We're hoping that the licenses are valuable enough because they're going to be limited to have viable, profitable and sort of profitable businesses, and that'll be good because you won't have too much competition driving down prices, which is bad for public health and also bad for these social equity applicants. Next slide. Okay, the tax structure is unique. It's the first in the country. I won't get into too much detail, but we really have two tiers of taxation. One at the distribution level, so up front, one sort of where the distro happens, like in alcohol, same thing. And that's like in alcohol, taxing THC. So the more THC, this psychoactive ingredient you have in the product, the greater the tax. And so the idea there is, like in alcohol, to sort of hopefully disincentivize high THC products and incentivize the lower THC products. That's going to get collected and remitted to the state. And then there's a retail level tax at the point of sale. That's a 9% excise tax for the state and a 4% retail tax for the locals, and that's divided between the county and the city, town, and village. We originally had a 3% retail tax, and then realized that we're better off, providing a larger piece at retail and then allowing that to be split between the locals. So I know that this is the tax component, but there are other ways we reinvest in locals, including the county, that I'm going to talk about. So I wouldn't get too stuck on taxation as the only source of revenue for local governments in dealing with sort of the adjustment period of recreational or adult use cannabis rolling out across the state. So next slide. Some of the revenue, and this is a big piece of the equation. The revenue distribution has been earmarked very specifically to 3 funds. So we estimated, or the division of budget estimated a revenue target of about $350 million. It all depends on the size of the industry, but it could be a sizable source of income. And it was clear from the legislature and from the executive that money needed to go back into special earmarked funds dedicated to particular important services. And this is how it's broken down. 40% goes to education, 20% goes to drug treatment and public education. It's a lot of money that goes towards anybody who starts to consume. We already have folks that are suffering from cannabis use disorder. The numbers we're seeing are similar to what you'd see in alcohol. There seems to be a sort of fixed 10% of folks that consume on a regular basis that have a hard time regulating their consumption. That's the people we want to look at and we want to target. Those are the folks we want to get to and help, rather than incarcerate them. We want to get them back on track with jobs and a community support. And then 40% goes to exactly that, community grants reinvestment fund. And the idea here is, and I updated the bullet here because the actual language of the statute makes it clear that the money goes to grants to community-based nonprofits and approved local government entities. So approved local government entities has yet to be exactly defined, but It can certainly include county health departments. It can include county departments of social services. And clearly what this intends to target is communities that have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition, which again needs to be defined in regulations by the control board. But those communities are within your counties and within your towns and your villages. And they're ones that have just, disproportionate arrests for the most part. You're going to have poverty, you're going to have other issues as well, but the sort of the short way to get to that, and we're going to refine that through a look at data, is those communities that have been impacted in that way. And 40% of the revenue is going to be in the form of grants, and they're going to be used for mental health, cannabis use disorder, jobs, housing, all the sort of wraparound services that are going to facilitate sort of the healing of the communities that have been impacted. And so those grants can very well go to local county and government entities. So keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Big, the top line, I think I've mentioned some of these numbers: 350 million annually in revenue, 30 to 60,000 potential jobs, according to the Rockefeller Institute. We do want to encourage craft beverages market. We want to limit the number of vertically integrated entities, or at least that's our recommendation. That's what the statute seems wants to do. The Cannabis Control Board is really going to be the ones that set the exact numbers on this. But certainly it is meant to create more small, well-paying jobs than few large companies. Next slide, please. Municipal opt-out is a topic. Is there? I'm sorry, this is a question for Alex and Steve. How long do you? I don't recall if I have a time limit. Is this how much longer do you want me to go? Is there a?
Well, I would say that you have time, Axel. I would say, let's see, like 20 minutes, 25 minutes each speaker.
Okay, and so we got.
I'd take another 10 minutes or so, and I'll check in with you.
Great. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to.
Not a problem at all. It's a fair question, and we want to get everybody's comments in. Thank you.
Right. Exactly. So because the next slides are opt-out, traffic safety, but Renee is going to talk about that. Personal consumption. There's some issues that Steve raised at the beginning that I think are important. Workplace or safety. They're all important, right? And each one deserves a lot of time, but I'll kind of go over them quickly, and then either people can ask questions, or we're always willing to keep talking. For me, and from the executive standpoint, the reason we really wanted to get on with everybody is just to say that our door's open on this. We're facilitating the work of the Cannabis Control Board. They're going to be making a lot of these decisions. The legislature has a say in that process as well, but the locals really should be letting their voice be heard on some of these priorities, because there's room for interpretation in the regulation, and we really do want to outreach and get feedback. So hopefully this will serve as an overview on questions that you can ask now and also down the road. But municipal opt-out, generally, we went back and forth on how to do this. There were a lot of different opinions, and in the end, we thought that the municipalities that were closest to the ground, that were closest to where the dispensaries were going to be operating, should be the ones that opt out. So cities, towns, and villages are the ones that can make the decision, and they make it with respect to retail dispensaries and on-site consumption. So the lounges we were talking about, the sort of on-site, and then the retail sales. You're not going to see them opt out of growing or opt out of processing. Those are really much more manufacturing operations, and it was going to get too complicated to do that. So you can opt out. They can opt out by December 31st, or 9 months after the effective date, which is about the same. If they do opt out, there's always the chance to opt back in at any time, and there is the possibility of a permissive referendum if folks opt out in accordance with the municipal home rule law. So folks have to sort of weigh what their community and their town and their village really want to do on this topic. Next slide, please. Other than opt-out, really what we're looking at is, we've had examples in other states where community host agreements, for example, in Massachusetts, had a sort of really nefarious effect of slowing things down and of creating another layer of approval that just wasn't very productive and led to some unfortunate side effects. So what we thought was adopt the alcohol model and have really time, place, and manner. So local zoning. So think of it that way. That's where do you want it to be located? What are the local building codes that apply? What are the hours of operations, the signage, and whatnot? As long as it doesn't unreasonably restrain the ability of these entities to function, unless you've opted them out. So that's on local control. It's going to be through that approach. And on local control, one thing that I don't have here, which is important, that Steve said, is that you think of consumption like tobacco. So the idea there is it's really under the Clean Indoor Air Act. So there are some basic provisions. Anywhere you can smoke tobacco, you can consume cannabis, but the locals are able to impose more restrictive regulations on that under the Clean Indoor Air Act. So that's the framework. So again, we try to adopt frameworks as much as possible that existed, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Next slide. Traffic safety. I'm sort of going to jump over this because Renee, I think, is going to speak to this. But suffice it to say that there is money. I don't know if Renee will talk about this, but clearly in the statute is earmarked money for more drug recognition experts, which are again at a county level and local level. That is money that's going to be available for DREs, and that's contemplated specifically in the bill. So again, another source of funding for counties and locals. Let's go. Personal possession and home cultivation. So this, there's a lot of support for this, especially upstate. A lot of people that have a hard time accessing dispensaries or want to grow a couple of their plants, and almost every other state in the country that's gone this way has allowed some form of it. So we did go with it. What we sort of compromised. What we said was, you can grow up to 6 plants, 3 that are mature and 3 that are mature. So because you're growing the next set, so it's really 3 plants that are flowering. There's going to be a lot of regulations and rules on this. It's not going to be a free-for-all, so those have to be promulgated by the control board, and we're going to wait. So the thinking is, if you have an industry up and running with the dispensaries we've been talking about, so people have a place to go if they want to consume responsibly, we're going to wait for that to happen, and then 18 months after the first sale at one of these retail locations, then we're going to issue regulations governing home grow. So it's going to be a few years before you can do home grow. The exception to that is medical. We currently have about 150,000 patients. Most of them do not need to home grow, but some of them have expressed an interest in home growing. So 6 months or after the effective date of this bill, we will allow home grow if you have a medical license and again meet all the regulations that will be part of this. And you can't, this is really just a plant. You're not allowed to extract using volatile solvents. We're not looking for people to become professional extractors. This is really for personal consumption. Okay, next slide. I'm going to skip over this. It's essentially you can have up to 3 ounces legally, and there are a number of new provisions which enforce the violation with fines. And as Steve said, some of these are civil offenses, so there is some cleaning up and clarification that needs to happen on how these are going to be administered, by whom. The Office of Cannabis Management will have its own enforcement, but these are things, again, regulations from the board are going to be important in this respect, and so we'll work with everybody on this. Workplace safety. Just a reminder, New York City banned the use of drug tests for marijuana a couple of years ago. What this bill sought to do, the intent of this law was to mirror the labor law under 201D. 201D of the labor law is really a framework that folks use, that balance the rights of employers to make sure they have a safe workplace, and of employees to be able to consume alcohol recreationally outside of the workplace. So there are all sorts of balancing factors in making sure that people aren't intoxicated and impaired during work hours. So the general rule is you can't discriminate. And if someone's doing something on their own time, then for the most part, you shouldn't be penalizing them for it. However, as Steve pointed out, it's very clear that that doesn't apply if you risk losing federal funding. So carrying a firearm is a very good example, or educational institutions that may lose federal funding. Then you can, in order to abide by the federal prohibition against, against cannabis, you can implement workplace safety and drug testing, and you can do so as long as it's uniform and non-discriminatory. So, and then just another caveat on that is keep in mind that we do have, for medical is more complicated. You're right. Medical is really a medicine, and you need to accommodate folks that need the medicine. We've had a lot of very promising science looking at folks getting off opioids, getting back to work using cannabis rather than opioids. A lot, sort of more functional. So you got to be careful, and you got to make sure people use it legitimately, and so forth. But that is, you cannot discriminate against folks who are using it for medical purposes. Okay, next slide. I think we're getting there. Yeah, so this is going to be my last slide. It's just a reminder that we are going to be coming out with a lot of public health and education campaigns. There's a budget for it. There's a whole earmarking when it comes to the revenue for it. We're in touch with the local health departments. We've been working with them for 3 years on this. We know they're going to be our partners in this. We're really looking to shift the model towards an education one, so people understand how to consume responsibly. So there is a lot that's going to come out here on how to consume. There are going to be a lot of restrictions for youth and for driving, and Renee can talk about some of the stuff, the great work that the Traffic Safety Committee has done on alcohol. We're going to replicate that and really push that and turbocharge it. So so that's it. That's a whirlwind of the marijuana regulation taxation law. Hopefully that was of use to you, and thanks again, Steve and team, for giving us the opportunity to walk through this.
Terrific, Axel. Thanks so much. And we really appreciate, again, your legal mind and care and concern. And thank you to our governor for including us throughout these negotiations and always being respectful to our point of view. Next up, Renee Borden. Renee's job, if it wasn't complicated before the legalization of adult use cannabis, is now going to be monumentally more busy. Renee, we took a lot of questions about driving under the influence, a lot of concerns advanced by our sheriffs, our public health departments, parent-teacher association groups, lots of people concerned about driving under the influence, and your comments here about advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement and the drug recognition expert program in New York State. Very helpful in this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for having me. As you said, yes, my job has gotten a little bit more complicated. I don't mind. Obviously, we're here to make sure the roadways are safe. So as a DRE statewide coordinator, I oversee the A-RIDE and DRE programs along with the Stop DWI program for the state of New York. I know especially now with the legalization, there are some questions about trainings and what the requirements are, the cost to your agency. So I'm going to give you a little quick overview. And as Axel said, there is money out there. So during some of my points, if there's a time that I say it's on the agency, there is going to be money at that point for that agency to use that funding to help get their officers to the training. So before we had to put it on the agency, but now we're looking to help out and get everyone trained as much as we can. So the governor's office, traffic safety office, is committed to keeping our roadways safe. With the new cannabis legalization, we have taken steps to increase our training for the law enforcement across the state. So A-RIDE we mentioned first. I'm going to start with that, and it stands for Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement. The training is used to bridge the gap between SFST and DRE school, and the class is a prerequisite to be a DRE. So in order for them to get into the school, we really needed to step up our A-RIDE trainings so that we could get more DREs in the state of New York. The beginning of the A-RIDE class, officers are tested on their SFST proficiency to ensure that they are current on the administration of the test. A-RIDE is a great class for officers to realize that there are many things an individual can be impaired on. It also makes them think and understand that they should call a DRE when someone's BAC comes back at an O2 and is not consistent with their behavior. A lot of times when officers are right out of the academy, say that they're not experienced enough to realize that, they should be looking for something else. And although the O2 is under the legal, under what they would be charged with, there's still something else. The A-Ride is a 2-day course. It's 16 hours and it's conducted throughout the state of New York. So we try to spread that around so that every county or most counties actually will have one within their area, so their officers, it's easier for them to get to it. Typically in a calendar year, we would hold approximately 20 of those classes. This year so far, prior to the legalization and knowing that it was pending from January until the beginning of this month, we've already conducted 48 A-Rides with 20 more scheduled for the rest of the year, and that will increase as we go throughout the year. If anyone's interested in finding those classes, a lot of them are listed on the Governor's Traffic Safety website, which is trafficsafety.ny.gov. If you go out there, you can find that. There's also, if anyone's looking for that later on, I can send out my contact information and you can reach out. Now for the DRE training, DRE stands for Drug Recognition Expert, and I'm sure all of you have heard it now that it's been in the news and all over the place. And it's a national program. Everything that's taught in our school is the same across the country. You can go to any state within the country and we're all doing the exact same thing. There are multiple phases that an officer must complete in order to become a DRE. The first is the application process, which is we're probably one of the few states that does that, but it allows us to get the best candidates out there to do the job. They must fill out an application, submit it prior to the deadline that it's listed for the class. And on the application, it'll be reviewed to make sure that they've met the prerequisites, so that they've attended A-Ride and that they're not currently on probation within their agency. The interview process consists of a 6-member panel. This would include myself and 5 other DRE instructors. During their interview, the officers are asked to perform their SFSTs again to make sure that they're squared away with what they're doing on the road. As long as they complete them successfully, they'll be asked to take a seat and answer additional questions to the panel, pretty much sell themselves as to their drive for the enforcement and to help us out with keeping the road safe. The travel costs for that, as I said before, that would be on the agency. However, there will be funding coming forward. So with the schools that we're going to be having, they're going to be spread out across the state, that hopefully the counties that need more will be able to get their officers to those closer to home. Based on the score from the interview and the need within the counties that have applied, that's how the candidates are selected to attend the school. So it's not strictly based on score. It's also based on a county need. So we do take that into account. Typically a DRE school has 20 students, and that's due to, there's a lot of hands-on activities that occur throughout that course, and having instructors there to assist with that and observe them and help them out. It's just a more manageable size of a school. We are also looking into increasing our instructor pool. And again, that's more training that will take a week for instructors to attend. And then there's multiple steps that instructors have to go through before they're even certified. So it's a process to get that completed. So after the DRE has been accepted, they attend a 2-week classroom portion, which is 72 hours. And it includes 2 alcohol workshops where they, again, test their skills from SFSTs to completing an entire 12-step DRE evaluation. And during those 2 weeks, they're required to take 6 quizzes, and they have to score an 80 or higher to continue on. If at any point they score lower than an 80, they're dismissed from the class. These are national standards. These are something that we follow due to what they're required for the school. There's no fee for the officer to attend the DRE school. The agency would be responsible for the cost, again, for the hotel for that 2-week portion of the school. But like I said, typically we try to get the schools that are located close to counties so that if you're sending your officers, they're within their own county or an adjacent county. During the school, the officers are issued equipment. So GTSE and Stop DWI pay for that equipment for them, so agencies do not take that cost. They're assigned a tablet, which helps us maintain a database that gives us all the information that we could possibly need. And I think we are in a good place right now to have the information prior to legalization regarding cannabis across the state and what we were seeing. So the tablets allow them to put their evaluation in electronically, and it's automatically in the database from the time that they hit submit. So it helps us get the data a little quicker than someone filling out a piece of paper and then putting it into the system later on. Also, they're issued stethoscopes, blood pressure cuffs, lights, thermometers, and a couple other things that are required to do their job. So nothing is put on the agency for them to have to purchase for them to do their job as a DRE. Once they've completed the 2-week portion, they're required to complete a hands-on evaluations on impaired individuals. Currently, New York goes to Jacksonville, Florida, or Philadelphia to complete these evaluations. These locations allow us to bring 20 officers, and we're able to complete all that we need to complete within a week while we're there. There's very few of these facilities around the country, so these are the 2 that we find that are most beneficial for us. Field certifications is paid for by Stop DWI Foundation with a grant from GTSC. So all expenses that are incurred for the travel, airfare, meals, anything that would be incurred to go to those field certifications are covered by Stop DWI. So nothing is incurred by the agency nor the officer themselves. The DRE evaluation is a 12-step process and is done the same way every time. And I know some of you may question some of the information that you get regarding cannabis and how long it stays in the system. They are allowed. We have had many conversations with IACP regarding that, and they are allowed to take toxicology at the very beginning. They just have to indicate that that's what they did. So we aren't delaying the process at all. If they have to take some sort of toxicology, they can do it in the beginning as long as they note that on their evaluation. Some of the steps that they perform on their 12-step are the SFSTs and additional tests that they are taught in ARIDE, which are lack of convergence, finger to nose, and modified Romberg. So getting these additional tests starting in ARIDE and going to DRE help them recognize the impairment, and for an ARIDE officer to understand that they need to call a DRE. So it just gives them a couple more tools to show that they really need to take a closer look at the individual. They also check blood pressure, pulse rate, temperatures, measure pupil sizes. These are just a few of the steps that they conduct to assist them in calling a category of a drug. While we're in field certifications, each officer is required to complete 12 evaluations, and they have to call 3 of the 7 categories and have an accuracy rate of 75% when compared to toxicology. So just remember that DREs, no matter what, are required to call a category and not a specific drug. They will never call a drug. So I think there's a little confusion on that sometimes, but they will call, they have to call a specific category or categories. As most of you probably know, most individuals driving impaired are not on just one thing. Once they've completed all of those evaluations, they're then required to take a final knowledge exam. This exam is not timed and could take up to 7 hours. The purpose of the exam is to show that the officer understands how to apply everything that they have learned, not only in the classroom, but during field certifications as well. So it's the totality of everything for all of the training they've received. And this exam is a pass or fail. There's no number grade associated with it. They have to show that they have the knowledge to go out and do what they were trained to do. So currently New York now has 334 DREs. This includes the most recent class of 19 that graduated this past Saturday. Typically we used to hold 2 to 3 DRE schools in New York with about 20 students each for each year. Next year we are increasing that to 6 schools across the state. So we are shortly going to be announcing those and putting those out on the website that I had mentioned earlier for all 6 schools. And currently New York is ranked 2nd in the country for the amount of evaluations that we conduct, only behind the state of California. In 2020, we conducted 2,557 enforcement evaluations, and of that, 1,171 of them were impaired by cannabis. So an extreme concern, obviously, that we all have is to make sure that we have more of these officers out there to get the impaired people off the roadway. So our goal is to assist all agencies getting their officers prepared, keeping our roadway safe. So whatever I can do to assist any of you, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to help you out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. Next up, we have Sydney Snow. Sydney Snow from Ease Technologies. Sydney, going to talk about delivery and social equity. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Snow.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. We can go back to, I guess the title slide. Yep. that works. So hi, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm with Ease. And I wanted to start by just thanking Stephen and the whole New York State Association of County Staff for inviting me to speak with you all today. We're going to be talking about safe delivery and really how it can promote social equity. Ease is really excited that the New York State legislature passed adult use cannabis legislation this session. We were really happy to see that delivery is allowed in the MRTA, and I'm going to talk to you all about what delivery looks like in a well-regulated market. So we'll talk about things like, is it safe? How does it work? What are some of the best practices that we've actually seen across markets? Next slide, and go to the About Ease side. Great. So I'm going to start by just describing a little bit about Ease and how it works. So we were launched in 2014 as a marketplace that connects adult use consumers with licensed products via on-demand delivery, licensed cannabis products. We are also California's largest cannabis employer with over 1,000 employees. That have completed over 7 million legal cannabis deliveries to date. Ease is really all about creating a more diverse and sustainable industry. And we're doing that through our programs, like our social equity program, the Momentum Business Accelerator, our social equity partners program, and a lot more that I will get into later. Ease looks like any other online retail shop you've ever been to. So what you do, you'll see a list of products. You click on those products that you want to go into your cart. You check out, and in fact, let me just walk you all through like how delivery works from a customer perspective. So as a customer, you register on ease.com for access to local licensed cannabis products. Customers have to upload a valid government issued ID to verify they're over the age of 21. As a customer, you can then browse the menu and access educational content about the product. So you know exactly what you're getting, how to consume, etc. You add those products to your cart and complete your order. And then behind the scenes, Ease technology is using GPS tracking to trace every order and really maintain compliance with state and local laws. So the delivery driver will arrive at your home. That driver checks your ID again, of course, to ensure that the person who is picking up the products is the same person who ordered it. They collect the signature, and then they hand you your order in child-proof packaging. Afterwards, as a customer, you'll receive an electronic copy of your receipt with details on the products that were delivered to you, the price of those products, and also it breaks down the taxes that were charged. Next slide. So how Ease works in general, one of the things that we are proud of is that we are scaling local brands. We found that brands really see Ease as a very valuable marketing tool that allows local brands to directly connect with a consumer base via our on-demand delivery process that is geographically diverse. So if you were a retailer or you had a brand that might have been in 1 or 2 local dispensaries in your area, through delivery and particularly the Ease platform, you could possibly expand your business statewide to the entire state of California. That way, your brand is getting more brand recognition. You can be in more retail shops, but also you also have the opportunity to be statewide on the Ease platform. Ease is also creating jobs. So like I said, we're the largest cannabis employer in the state of California. And it's a really interesting because it's not just delivery driver roles that are available and jobs that are available. So you have everything from delivery drivers and depot managers to engineers and artists and marketing executives. We are creating jobs at every part of the process and delivery. And the great thing about it is all of our employees are W-2 employees of the dispensary. So they get health benefits and really don't have the 1099 problem as well. We're also elevating social equity partners. So Ease is a leader in supporting social change and really addressing directly the failed war on drugs. And as an industry leader, we have programs like our Social Equity Partners Program, our one-of-a-kind social equity menu, our Momentum Business Accelerator Program. And what those programs are doing, they're financially, operationally, and through marketing, supporting social equity brands. And I will get into a lot more detail about our social equity partners and our programs later. And then I think the best part about the legal market, as opposed to the unregulated market, is that, you know, on the Ease platform, you really get a great education on the products that you are buying. So we have all of the information about how to consume, when you should consume, what do you want to feel like, on our platform, to really give folks an opportunity to learn as much as possible before they buy a product. We even have a customer service team that if you want to walk through, you know, what is this, how should I use this product? Our customer service team, you can call them up and they will walk you through what these products do, what's in them, where they came from. We found that a lot of our customers are very socially conscious and they want to know, are they buying from a social equity brand? We highlight that on our menu. Are they buying from a woman-owned brand? We definitely highlight that kind of stuff. And it also is helpful for first-time or folks who are very new to the plant to get a lot of education without maybe being intimidated in a retail shop where they don't have a lot of time to maybe ask some of those questions to the folks that are selling the cannabis in a retail shop. So that's definitely a benefit. And then lastly, we are trying our best to build a sustainable cannabis industry. So Ease in particular, we are working with policymakers, law enforcement, regulators, industry stakeholders to help the cannabis industry grow in a sustainable, professional, and responsible way. And it's something we take very seriously. Next slide. Now let me get into the core industry principles of delivery in general. So in 2021, customers expect delivery. It doesn't matter what sector they're in, they want their goods delivered. The good news is that New York State has allowed for delivery in the legal cannabis market. But, you know, in markets that don't have a well built out regulated delivery market or have banned delivery outright, we see customers utilizing the illicit market, which has a robust delivery market already. So either way it goes, you know, customers will utilize delivery, and we really want to make sure for safety reasons, to ensure tax revenue, and most importantly, to really build a good regulated delivery market for customers and businesses that we are providing a safe alternative to the illicit market. And we are really fortunate that New York State is on the way to meet consumers where they are, so we won't have to worry about that as much. Delivery is definitely an essential service and a cornerstone of a successful legal market. So, you know, again, it provides safe legal access to consumers who might be unable to get to a retail shop because maybe their local county or city or town has opted out of cannabis and they might have to drive a long way, or they're ill and they don't have access to transportation and they're not driving. Delivery is definitely a safe alternative for them. Also, you know, right now we're in the midst of a pandemic. There are a lot of people who are reluctant to visit a local retail shop just because they don't want to go indoors right now, understandably so. Delivery is another great option for those folks as well. And then I just want to talk a little bit about taxes. I know Axel went over this in a lot more detail, so I can just talk about from how delivery impacts taxes in California, which is where we are operating. So over 20% of cannabis tax revenue in California came from delivery. And that even came from some communities that did not have like brick and mortar shops. Those communities still got tax revenue if their customers lived in the area and got cannabis delivered to those areas. So in fact, Ease and its partners have remitted over $100 million in state and local tax revenue since 2016 in California. And the standard has always been that all delivery employees are W-2 employees of the dispensary, which really allows our employees, again, to have health benefits and well-paying jobs. And then community control. Delivery services definitely provide safe home access for patients who are using cannabis for medical purposes, while also respecting local decisions to restrict storefront locations. So, we found that when cannabis legalization happens in a state, there is a reduction in alcohol consumption. And when consumers use delivery, they aren't necessarily driving back from a retail store, maybe impaired, which makes the community a safer place in general. Next slide. Trust and safety. So safety is a huge piece of a regulated delivery market. Some of what's at the core elements that we have seen in a well-regulated cannabis delivery market and that are now best practices are some of the following, and some of those things that you see on the screen. So we have age and ID verification. So all of our customers are required to provide proof of age and identification with a government issued ID that when they first create an account. And then that is again verified with the delivery driver in person, checking to make sure again that the person who placed the order online is the same person picking it up. And then IDs are also reviewed by a third-party vendor using industry-leading software to ensure that the ID that anyone uploads is real, in fact, and is registered with the state. We also do driver background checks. So delivery drivers are, again, W-2 employees and are required to pass criminal history and driving record reviews before they can actually be hired on as a driver. We also have GPS tracking. So we do live tracking of each individual SKU on each cannabis product. And we also have GPS tracking of the driver to ensure the driver is safe throughout their route. So we want to make sure that they haven't stopped for any long periods of time and they haven't checked in with us, so we can make sure that the drivers are safe at all times. And then we have dynamic manifest, which each driver has a detailed live manifest and delivery route that is on their device that they can show any law enforcement officer to prove, one, that their cannabis products are coming from a licensed shop, that this is their route, this is where they're going, this is where they've been. And it really helps to really, one, keep the driver safe, but also helps to keep law enforcement informed. And then there's the vehicle compliance piece as well. So all of the delivery vehicles are unmarked delivery vehicles. So they're unmarked cars. And that's very different from, say, a FedEx delivery where the driver is in an open truck, leaves the truck unattended to make deliveries and then comes back. Cannabis delivery is the exact opposite of that. So the cannabis delivery vehicles, again, unmarked cars, and the requirement is that all products are to be contained in a lockbox that's then locked in the trunk of the car. And when a driver gets out of the vehicle to make a delivery, that car is parked and locked. So one of the most important parts of delivery is having that total control and access of the products. You never have to worry about, oh, can someone get in? Can things go missing? It just doesn't happen. And then a full-time trust and safety team is really important, and it's something that we do here at Ease. We have a full-time team that's just dedicated to trust and safety. So it really allows them to respond to any incident that happens in real time and can develop really good long-term relationships with law enforcement as well. So law enforcement are very, they understand Ease, they understand how it works, and our trust and safety team has really helped us to build those relationships. While this is not a part of any law in California, we believe it should be an industry standard for delivery companies because it just makes life a little bit easier for the drivers and definitely helps to build better relationships with law enforcement. And next slide. So for the remainder of my time here, I'm going to talk about social equity, which is a huge part of the cannabis industry in general. But what might be surprising to some is how delivery is actually very well positioned to support social equity businesses and founders and owners in the cannabis space. So delivery specifically is a very good way for social equity brands to reach very large geographically diverse audiences that they might not be able to encounter in a store, right? It's also possible with delivery for products to be featured on a website that has more shelf space than a brick and mortar store would actually have. So for example, if a brand was able to, just have their flower in a retail store, maybe they're able to, sell more than their flower. They have a couple of other products. So maybe they able to sell their flower tincture in another, maybe an edible product that they have. And they're reaching more people while getting more shelf space. So that is really important and helpful to small businesses and social equity businesses that are trying to grow. So here at Ease, one of our core principles and values is that we know we cannot be in this industry and ignore the people who came before us and those who were deeply affected and impacted by the war on drugs. And as a result, Ease decided to really implement our own social equity programs that were built with the inclusion advice of social equity brands and partners, what they wanted to see in a social equity program. And that's not something that is required by local or state law in California. It's just something that we thought was the right thing to do. So there's a couple components of our social impact work. One is our social equity menu. So our social equity menu is the only of its type in California. And it lets customers quickly and easily order social equity products on ease.com and gives preferred treatment to social equity brands. So this program has actually worked out quite well for social equity brands, as we have sold over $7 million worth of social equity products via the Ease platform in just the last 2 years since the inception of the program. That's $7 million that goes directly into the pockets of social equity brands, social equity founders, underrepresented founders. We have also our social equity partnership program, and this is a first move for the cannabis industry. We launched a multi-point social equity partners program, which really provides brands with the financial and operational support, which is important, just almost can be just as important as the financial piece, to really help them scale and succeed on Ease and beyond. So that's the beyond part is also important because we don't require them to just work with Ease. They can work with several other businesses. We just want to give them the support to be able to grow. Social equity licensing partnership program. That program is we're really focused on providing capital for social equity partners to grow their independent businesses. So we're also, during that process, also providing them revenue pipelines and bonuses to our social equity partners so that they are able to grow. And these are folks who have like retail shops and licenses there. And then lastly, we have our Momentum program, which you can see a picture of our 2019 Momentum cohort when folks were able to be in person, which seems so long ago. But our Momentum program is a business accelerator that's focused on supporting underrepresented founders in the cannabis space. So that means Black and Brown folks, the LGBTQ community, women, veterans, patients, really anyone that has been deeply impacted by the war on drugs, we can prove that. And they also have wanted to get in the cannabis industry, but have had significant barriers to entry. So what the Momentum program does, and the participants in that program, they each receive $50,000 in grants, a 12-week business development curriculum, and access to Ease's legal, marketing, and investment resources that can also help them grow their business to be even larger than it already is. So we actually have someone from New York, Jim Sharon, who is from the Syracuse area, who was a Momentum winner this year, and we're really excited to see what his business does in Syracuse with the influx of grant money.
Okay,
And then
Sydney, we're going to have to wrap up here. We are at our final, we had just a few minutes left. Did you want to just conclude it just so we can get to some questions and answers?
that's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Sydney Snow. We wanted to bring in ease for a particular reason so that the New York local government officials can understand what's happening around the country on social equity issues. And California was a logical place for us to start. And I'm very happy that Sydney was able to join us today so that we can hear what is happening in California, because it is something that is going to happen in New York. And so having somebody do that firsthand has been invaluable to us here at NYSAC, and we hope that you appreciated some of the things that Sydney was saying. If not, perhaps you'll come to understand them as we begin the further implementation of cannabis in New York State. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Axel, perhaps you could describe, is there any county health departments or mandates or roles for a county health department? What role is the local health department and the state health department? Is there concurrent jurisdiction over this, or has the Office of Cannabis Management determined what will be the state role versus the local health role?
So, so the primary jurisdiction for the program and for rolling out the regulations is with the Cannabis Control Board. So everything's been centralized there. But I think the intent of the legislation is to ensure that both the state health department and the local health departments are going to be involved in rolling out the healthcare campaigns and being, potentially in receipt of the tax revenue, as I described, in the funds that are dedicated to substance use disorder. So if you look at the fund part in particular, there are clear expenses that are earmarked for not only the Department of Health, but for the Department of Mental Health, OPWDD, OASIS. And so I think when you talk about jurisdiction, primary jurisdiction on issuing regulations is going to rest with one body. We think that probably makes the most sense, and that's what the statute calls for. But after that, I think it's going to be a team effort with concurrent jurisdiction with the local health departments and the state health agencies.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Axel, I guess is towards you, or this might perhaps bring in Renee here. The question is about volunteer fire driving a large fire truck without a CDL. The question concerns legal liability of a volunteer fire company might have for a firefighter driving a truck who has used recreational marijuana and is injured with property damage of the fire truck. Does the volunteer fire benefit law medical cover the injured volunteer firefighter in this scenario? Any thoughts on that? I know it's an in-depth question. Might be something we need the Workers' Compensation Board to weigh in on.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are so many pieces of specialized law here, and that's an extremely technical question. I really don't have an answer for that.
Okay, perhaps for a commercial driver's license, we can address that there is a federal prohibition on the use of cannabis while holding a CDL. Next question is for SUNYs. Do we know if the State University of New York has weighed in on how they think municipalities with colleges should evaluate and respond to the cannabis law, given that federal law still prohibits its use on state university properties? Axel?
Yeah, so certainly institutions of higher learning and schools generally have been active in deciphering the requirements of federal law and their legally permissible drug policies on campus. That's something that they're actively looking at least as far as I know. So as you said, the law clearly contemplates that if you're in the risk of losing federal funding, you're going to be able to maintain your drug policies as long as they're non-discriminatory and equally applied. So It's still a little early to tell exactly how and what shape all of them are going to take, but I know that that's something everybody's looking at. So I expect we'll hear more about that in the near future.
Okay. If a municipality opts out, town, city, village, do they still have the authority to regulate adult use cannabis dispensaries and on-site consumption locations with zoning by municipal home rule?
I'm not entirely sure I follow that question. If a locality seeks to opt out, then it would opt out of having any dispensary or social consumption site open in that local jurisdiction. So it just wouldn't be allowed. So I'm not sure how they would then regulate the zoning, like the hours of operations or signage, if those were not permitted license types in that jurisdiction.
Okay, I think you just did answer it. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Can a person currently possess and grow a home plant for personal consumption pending further regulation in 6 to 18 months?
No, that's a clear no. The intent of the legislation is only to allow adult use personal grow 18 months after the first sale, at which point regulations will be issued, and then only pursuant to those very specific regulations. So we are probably about 18 months away from the first sale, just estimating the time it'll take to get regs out and whatnot. That's kind of ballpark what we think it'll take, the Cannabis Control Board. And so then it's 18 months after that regulations will be issued. Until that time, you cannot home grow under adult use.
Okay. Next question, can you expand a little bit on, this is predominantly for counties, although it might be some town officials on, but the county officials, their ability to restrict consumption in areas where nicotine is currently permitted. You spoke a little bit about the Clean Indoor Air Act, which does enable the counties to limit further where you can smoke. So the ability of private, so the first question is, can you expand a little bit more on the county's ability to restrict cannabis consumption in areas where nicotine is currently permitted? The next follow-up to that question is, similarly, the ability of private parties, say multi-unit housing landlords, to restrict smoking of cannabis while also permitting nicotine smoking. Can you comment on those two factors?
Yeah, a little bit, at least at a high level. Some of these questions start to get, very, very technical about the Clean Indoor Air Act. But at a high level, the Clean Indoor Air Act, as I understand it, permits local jurisdictions to further restrict where smoking can occur. And so consistent with those provisions, so as articulated under the Clean Indoor Air Act, those same restraints could be applied to cannabis. When it comes to landlords, now you're taxing my memory because I remember in the negotiations with the legislature, we spent a lot of time on this. Landlords are allowed to, if I remember correctly, again, I'm going from memory on the bill, but to prohibit smoking of cannabis on the premises. But I think your question was, can they prohibit smoking of cannabis, but not of tobacco? And that's something I'd need to look at, and/or may actually just need to be.
I believe they would be able to do that, but
I'm trying to find the provision actually as we
like an automobile or public park.
Yeah, it's a little different. Automobile has the concerns on impaired driving, so that's going to be. But let me, again, some of these things we just need to take back and talk to the right attorneys, because this is essentially bordering sort of legal advice on some of these things that.
Sure, no problem.
A lot of.
We'll leave it.
The framework really is that. The framework is, let's use an existing Clean Indoor Air Act let's look under there and let's start applying that as the framework.
Okay, let's take another question, just a few more, and then we'll wrap up today's session. This question is, how does the legalization of cannabis affect the employer-employee relationship, especially when employers require drug screening?
Well, so I sort of answered that. The way to think about this is akin to alcohol and other substance use. So if you look at Labor Law 201D, it lays out a framework where you balance the employee's ability to drink off the job with not showing up impaired during working hours. So as a general rule, that's the framework. There's a balancing act, and we incorporated cannabis into 201D, so I recommend looking at that. But the city already prohibited having a drug test for employment. So you can't come in and say, let me see if you have any THC in your system. Oh, you do, no matter when you consumed. It could stay in your body weeks, and I'm not going to hire you on that basis. That's no longer allowed at the city level. And so drug policies are trickier. But again, as you pointed out, if you risk losing federal funding, you can retain your drug policy. And certainly, under no circumstances do you need, as an employer, to permit drug impaired workers from working on the job.
Okay, we are beyond our time. Let me just end with this one question here about if a company such as Ease picks up a product in a particular city, but sells it, picks up a product in Syracuse and sells it in another town, who would get the excise tax? Axel, perhaps on that, or Sydney?
Yeah, I think the excise tax goes to the dispensary that sold the product.
Okay, well, there you have it. I want to thank our speakers here today, Axel Burnaby from the Governor's Office, Renee Bourdain from the New York State DRE Coordinator Committee, and also to Sydney Snow from Ease Technologies, and most importantly to our county officials that joined us here today. This will conclude today's webinar, and thank you all for your participation. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.